You've probably spoken these words hundreds of times, at school, at ball games, at government ceremonies. But what if one of America's most recognizable traditions wasn't part of the nation's founding at all? What if it once included a salute that America later abandoned, and words that didn't exist until decades afterward? The story behind the Pledge of Allegiance is far stranger than most Americans realize. Every morning across America, millions of voices rise in unison to recite just 31 words. Those words have echoed through classrooms, military ceremonies, sporting events, and civic gatherings for generations, becoming one of the nation's most familiar traditions. Most people assume the Pledge of Allegiance has existed since the birth of the United States, spoken by the Founding Fathers as the young republic took shape. Yet that assumption couldn't be further from the truth. For more than a century after the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776, there was no national pledge for Americans to recite. The Constitution had been written, wars had been fought, and presidents had come and gone, but no official promise of loyalty united the nation in a common ritual. It wasn't until the wounds of the Civil War had begun to heal, and a rapidly changing America searched for new ways to strengthen national identity, that the idea of a pledge finally emerged. What followed would create one of the most recognizable traditions in American history, while also sparking debates that continue more than a century later. The story begins in an America struggling to redefine what it truly meant to be one nation. The year was 1892, and the United States was preparing to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus's arrival in the Americas. Across the country, organizers planned nationwide ceremonies intended to inspire patriotism and bring millions of schoolchildren together in a shared expression of national pride. At the center of that effort was a Baptist minister and writer named Francis Bellamy. Working for a popular youth magazine that promoted the sale of American flags to public schools, Bellamy was asked to compose a brief oath that students could easily memorize and recite during the National Columbus Day celebration. His first draft read, "I pledge allegiance to my flag and the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all." The wording was intentionally simple, emphasizing unity only a generation after the Civil War had divided the nation. On October 12, 1892, an estimated 12 million students across the United States recited Bellamy's pledge in what became one of the largest public ceremonies in American history. Few could have imagined that those carefully chosen words would become a permanent part of American life, even as they continued to evolve in the decades ahead. The words of the pledge spread quickly through American schools, but it wasn't just the language that became tradition. Bellamy also introduced a specific gesture to accompany the recitation. Students were instructed to stand at attention, extend their right arm straight toward the American flag, with the palm facing upward, and hold the pose until the pledge was complete. Known as the Bellamy Salute, it became a familiar sight in classrooms across the country for decades. Photographs from the early 20th century show millions of children performing the gesture during patriotic ceremonies, unaware that history would soon give it a very different meaning. As fascist movements rose across Europe in the 1920s and 1930s, Benito Mussolini's followers, and later Adolf Hitler's Nazi Party, adopted strikingly similar outstretched arm salutes. What had once symbolized American patriotism suddenly looked almost identical to the salute used by totalitarian regimes. As the world moved toward another global war, many Americans became increasingly uncomfortable with the resemblance. A gesture created to express loyalty to democracy now risked being mistaken for allegiance to its greatest enemies, setting the stage for one of the pledge's most dramatic transformations. By the time the United States entered World War II in December 1941, the resemblance between the Bellamy Salute and the Nazi salute had become impossible to ignore. Newspaper photographs, newsreels, and wartime propaganda made the comparison unmistakable, and many Americans feared the traditional gesture could be misunderstood both at home and abroad. Determined to eliminate any confusion, Congress acted swiftly. In 1942, lawmakers adopted the United States Flag Code, establishing official guidelines for displaying and honoring the American flag. Just months later, the code was amended to replace the outstretched arm Bellamy Salute with the gesture Americans recognize today, standing respectfully with the right hand placed over the heart while reciting the pledge. The change was more than symbolic. It clearly separated American patriotism from the authoritarian imagery dominating Europe and reaffirmed the nation's commitment to democratic ideals during one of history's darkest conflicts. Although the words of the pledge remained unchanged, the way Americans expressed them had been permanently transformed. Yet another, even more famous change was still waiting just over a decade away, born not on a battlefield, but in the growing tensions of the Cold War. When World War II ended, a new global rivalry quickly emerged. The United States and the Soviet Union found themselves locked in the Cold War, competing not only with military strength, but with opposing political and ideological systems. American leaders often describe the struggle as one between freedom and the officially atheist government of Soviet communism. Against that backdrop, many believed the Pledge of Allegiance should more clearly reflect the nation's spiritual heritage. Religious organizations, civic groups, and elected officials began urging Congress to amend the pledge. Their campaign gained momentum in 1954 after President Dwight D. Eisenhower expressed support for the proposal. On June 14th, Flag Day, Congress officially added the words, "Under God," changing Bellamy's original text for the first time in more than 60 years. The revised pledge declared that the United States was one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. For millions of Americans, the change became a powerful expression of national identity during the Cold War. For others, it raised enduring questions about the relationship between patriotism, religion, and the Constitution, debates that continue to shape conversations across the country today. As the Pledge of Allegiance became a daily ritual in schools across the nation, an important question reached the highest court in the land. Could the government require someone to recite it? The answer came during World War II in a landmark 1943 Supreme Court case, West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett. The court ruled that public school students could not be forced to salute the flag or recite the pledge against their will. Writing for the majority, Justice Robert H. Jackson declared that no government official could prescribe what citizens must believe or compel expressions of patriotism. The decision became one of the strongest affirmations of First Amendment protections in American history, establishing that genuine loyalty cannot be demanded by law. In the decades that followed, new legal challenges focused on the phrase, "under God," with critics arguing it blurred the line between church and state, while supporters viewed it as a reflection of the nation's historical traditions. Although the courts have repeatedly considered these arguments, the pledge remains a voluntary expression in public schools. Today, students may choose to recite it, stand silently, or respectfully decline. A reminder that in America, the freedom to speak also includes the freedom not to speak. More than a century after it was first written, the Pledge of Allegiance remains one of the most recognized expressions of patriotism in the United States. It is recited in classrooms, echoed through government meetings, spoken before military ceremonies, and heard at countless community events and sporting competitions. For many Americans, those 31 words represent unity, sacrifice, and the ideals that have shaped the nation through war, prosperity, and hardship. For others, the pledge continues to inspire thoughtful debate about individual liberty, religious expression, and the meaning of patriotism in a diverse society. Those conversations have evolved alongside the country itself, reflecting the changing values and perspectives of each generation. Yet perhaps the most remarkable part of the pledge is how often its history is forgotten. It was not written by the Founding Fathers, it has not always contained the same words, and even the way it was once recited has changed dramatically over time. What began in 1892 as a simple school ceremony became a living piece of American history, continually shaped by war, politics, court decisions, and the nation's ongoing search for unity, without sacrificing the freedoms it promises to protect. The Pledge of Allegiance has never been a frozen piece of history. It has evolved alongside the nation itself, shaped by the aftermath of the Civil War, transformed during World War II, altered in the tensions of the Cold War, and examined repeatedly through the lens of the Constitution. Every change reflects a different chapter in America's story, revealing how a simple 31-word promise came to symbolize far more than loyalty to a flag. It became a mirror of the country's values, struggles, and enduring commitment to liberty. Whether spoken every morning in a classroom, recited before a public gathering, or quietly reflected upon by an individual, the pledge continues to remind Americans that patriotism has always been accompanied by the freedom to question, debate, and choose. That balance may be the most remarkable part of its legacy. But the pages of the Dusty Ledger are far from closed. In our next episode, we'll uncover the remarkable story behind another American tradition that millions recognize, yet few truly understand. Its history reaches back through centuries of conflict, sacrifice, and symbolism, and the truth behind it is even more fascinating than the legend. Until then, keep asking questions, keep turning the pages, and we'll see you in the next chapter of the Dusty Ledger.